It's great to follow you, Noel. Thanks so much. I think you took a topic that's very similar to mine, but put a different lens on it. So hopefully, when we combine our two discussions, it really gives a holistic perspective about innovation culture and innovation leadership. And one of the questions that I heard about what can you do to help train people once you want them to be more innovative, hopefully I pick up some of that thread as well. So let's dive in. Um, what is the creative distortion field? I've worked at large companies that have been in business for years who do what we like to call innovation theater. They give the impression that they're being very innovative, but in fact, they're operating with limited beliefs and innate cognitive biases that come with how things worked before and appear to support innovation verbally, but actually those same practices derail it. In particular, my experience during the transformation period of Renew Blue at Best Buy, what you saw was a lot of people in the company who had worked there for more than 15, 20 years. And so it was very hard for them to see the business in the new context of the digital age, omni-channel shopping, and so forth. And so those beliefs made it challenging for change to occur. And you'll see a lot of the examples of what I learned and what I observed in that process. So the book is called Creative Velocity, and why is that important? Well, creative velocity refers to the ability to quickly and efficiently originate new and innovative ideas that are useful and valuable. And the result of a true innovation culture is that creative velocity is a norm where people, no matter whether they're in finance or legal or ops and supply chain, just as easily contribute innovations in the way the company operates and works as do the people who actually build the company's products for external customers. And so creative velocity means that everybody, regardless of role or level, feels they have the capacity to quickly and efficiently originate innovative ideas. But the ones that are really important are the ones that are useful and valuable. And so being able to discern useful and valuable is part of creative velocity, because anybody can just come up with a lot of ideas. Just ask AI, there's a million of them. But how many of them are actually valuable is what's really important. So the creative distortion field is the single biggest impediment to creative velocity in a company, where people believe they are already acting that way, but are actually not encouraging that type of behavior. And so what are those performative behaviors we've seen in companies, either that we've worked in or that we've advised, right? Well, the first is this idea that we're using jargon. A classic one is we're doing design thinking, because we're giving our designers a lot more power. Well, that doesn't necessarily mean that's design thinking, as I'm sure many of you on this call know. Design thinking is actually almost a lifestyle of how you operate in your role and how you think about what it is you're doing and why you're doing it. So using the jargon without the actual substance is a classic performative behavior. Another one is you actually identify which roles are creative, and the teams are actioning in the shadow of these creative people. The idea that these creative ideas only come from a select few and these roles are deemed creative really sends a message to everyone else that they are following someone else's lead. I've worked at companies with siloed innovation labs, too many of them, as it would turn out. And what you see is great ideas fail when they come into the core mainstream business, because those people were not brought into the process of ideating and optimizing the idea for actual commercialization. And so the antibodies come out when things leave the lab and try to land in the major organism of the corporation, because there really isn't not only buy-in, there really is an understanding of why that's the thing to do instead of the thing I was doing all along. Talk about over-reliance on innovation theater. This is where we do a lot of demonstrations, but nothing actually happens. We can point to a lab or we can point to an experiment, but those things don't actually materialize. You create a big role like a chief innovation officer, but then you don't give them any teams or any OKRs to actually hold them accountable. And how many times have I been to a post-it note brainstorming session that when I leave the room, the post-it notes stay in the room? That nobody actually takes the ideas and formulates them into action plans or into even discovery efforts to see which ones are the worthwhile ones to pursue. Um, uh, Best Buy was great at creating slogans that didn't really create any kind of focused action. Uh, have fun while being the best isn't really actionable. Like, I don't know what to do with that as an employee. And that's an example where people's values look like they stand for something, but the employees don't know what to do with them. And then lastly, one of the most common things that we see happen is a token implementation of AI to say, we're there, we're doing AI, we're there, we're in the mix with everyone, and we're already rolling it out somewhere. But it's disconnected from either strategy or from the greater business objectives of the company. And so it doesn't really take root. It's kind of like a plant that doesn't have that root starter in the pot. It's there and it comes with something, but it actually never kind of invades the pot and really takes nutrients from the entire ecosystem that it's in. I'll take a moment to ask if there's any that resonate or any that I've missed, because I want to make sure that we're kind of clear when I talk about performative behaviors as being sort of the obfuscation of true innovation. Again, I can't see the chat, so if there's something you guys want to add, just either raise or Melody, wave me forward and I'll keep going.
Did you want to comment, Ilariana?
No, Melody, that was just a momentary expression because about the post-it notes.
Yeah, right. We've all been there where you think, what happens to all those post-it notes that were on the wall, right? It's so true. It's happened more than a few times. So like I said, it's a pattern I recognize. Well, I'll keep going. And again, Melody, speak up if there's something that you see burning in chat that I might be running past that I don't mean to.
Yep.
Perfect. So one of the things that we recognize, we think about bias often in terms of gender and ethnicity and our bias towards a certain outcome. But there's actually more critical biases to be aware of when it comes to innovation. And these are the cognitive biases that really tell us how we process information, what information we discount, what we think is trivial, what we add value to, and what we hold on to in how we accept new information. All of these things shape our tolerance for transformative change, i.e., risk, and our capacity to really imagine innovative ideas. These cognitive biases were actually cataloged on Wikimedia, and you'll see throughout this presentation, I'll have a QR code. It's the same code each time, so you only have to get it once. But when you see the code, you'll go to a Google Drive, and one of the things you'll see in that folder is the Wikimedia representation of 188 cognitive biases that interfere with processing information. What we decide we need to do quickly might actually make it so we get less information. We might bias towards the source of information as being more important than other sources. But when you look at this, you realize the amount of subconscious impact this has and how we face the challenges that we're trying to transform. So cognitive biases that tap our mental capacity to think big include things like functional fixations. A great example of this is, for the longest time, people thought the only way you shopped was to go to a store, pick out the thing you want, check out, and then load it in your car. Well, thank goodness for curbside pickup, because that just shuffled all that process around. I buy something and I check out, and then somebody else goes and gets it and brings it to my car. That's exactly the same process done in a different order. And unless we're willing to break those fixations, we might not see the more obvious customer benefit that could come from shaking up that process. So functional fixation, how things have always worked, status quo thinking, this is a huge trap for creative thinking and innovators who really don't know where to look for a solution. Sometimes it's to look at the way you're doing things today. A lot of times you'll feel that people hire for data-driven decision makers as leaders. They want that data, they want that proof point. But so many times there isn't actual accurate data to predict how people react to something, to predict what they'll care about and what they won't. And so a bias for data-driven decision making may actually prevent you from finding the insights that could take you down a path of novel thinking or differentiated innovation. And so being able to go where there isn't data to put an opinion out there and formulate a perspective on its value is a cognitive trap that you have to avoid. You have to go look for the insight that might come in the standard form of data and analytics. False consensus effect. There are company cultures that love to make sure everyone's on board before we make a hard turn, that love to make sure everybody feels they have a say in whether we should make the hard turn. And so we'll have a meeting and it'll look like everyone's on board, but then they'll have sub meetings outside the meeting to dismantle what was discussed in the meeting, to more or less obfuscate the path forward. So you'll think you had consensus because that's what the company theater creates. But in practicality, you don't have that buy-in because that false consensus effect is really a cultural norm, not actually a debate or a discussion around what may or may not be good in the idea. Companies' risk profiles, this is a big one. How comfortable are you? And this is kind of why I asked the question of Noel about failure. If you're afraid of failure, you're afraid of risk. And therefore, you're going to take less effort to go into areas where there is less known, right? Where there's less data, where there's less competitors testing the water for you. And therefore, you're going to limit your capacity to innovate. A lot of companies also believe that the only way something is innovative is if it's original. And I'm here to tell you that from 1770 to 2010, 77% of all US patents issued were the combination of two other technology codes. We build off the shoulders of people who came before us. How we do that might be original, but the idea itself may actually exist in combinations of other ideas. And our willingness to look at those things really can open up our mind to a new way of doing something. For instance, we've seen Uber as a new way to get transportation, community-based transportation. That model transported to the pet ownership world became Rover. And you are able to hire people directly to go to your house or to walk your dog or to babysit your dog or whatever, right? So the idea that something can spawn something else that's equally innovative is something companies should feel good about. And then problem framing. Sometimes the companies look at the symptom they're trying to fix and not the actual cause of the problem. And if we get stuck on how we frame the problem, including the symptom or the solution in it, we're less likely to come up with a new innovation. I'm going to keep going. If there's any questions, just interrupt me, Melody. You can say, hey, we got a question, and I'll stop. So ways to bust these biases. The first thing is self-awareness. At any level, in any role you have, the more self-aware you are, the more you're aware of your current emotional state, the more you're worried about your ability to succeed, the things that create stress in your life, those things can actually limit your thinking. But also that if you know what triggers a flow state, what makes you feel more creative. For me, it's a hot shower. For other people, it's a 10-mile run. If you know what those things are, you can actually bust the biases because in that flow state, you're able to take your subconscious mind and your conscious mind and find new patterns. And so being aware of what those things are that can actually cause you to go off the rails or that actually get you to your most creative mindset, then you're really able to take control of the biases that might be in your thought process. There are actual techniques, and we'll talk about a little of this later on in the presentation, but there are actually frameworks, ways to manage the discomfort, things that you can do that help you navigate the uncertainty. And the more you're willing to try these techniques, the more you're going to get comfortable with discomfort. Cognitive flexibility is probably the single most important bias to really bust. And to being rigid in your cognitive thinking requires you to see things one way. When you're that way, you know your expertise is driving you. But when you're flexible, you're willing to believe your expertise isn't the only solution, isn't going to provide the only solution. That there may be someone with a different idea, with different experience from a different industry on the team who sees this problem differently. And if you're open to that, if you're flexible enough to hear that, you're more likely then to come up with even a combination of that idea and your idea that's even more original than the one either of you thought of. So the ability to accept that someone else's perspective on a problem is a possible avenue for innovation really helps you let go of that rigidity in how you think about how things work. This seems obvious. Maintaining curiosity is obvious, but what the practice is you don't look beyond your expertise. When you're looking to solve a problem, you don't go look in a strange place for something that might trigger a thought. A really great example of this is I was interviewing folks for the book on a woman who worked in design at Reebok during the pump era. And what they did was they went and looked at biomimicry to see how fleas are able to jump 10 times their height. 100 times their height. Whatever that number was, it was what they wanted to accomplish with shoes. So by looking at the biomechanics of insects, they were able to look beyond their own expertise around making shoes to see what they could bring into that process. And then lastly, psychological distance is really important. You can't love your idea so much that you can't listen to other possible solutions. And you also have to be okay when it fails. And so discerning what was good about it and what wasn't good about it becomes really important without any of that emotion that my idea isn't going to work. So these are really important behaviors. And if the leaders, kind of going back to Noel's presentation, demonstrate this, then it becomes easier for the employees to mirror it. And these are behaviors that if leaders are showing, hey, I got it wrong, but it's okay. Hey, I thought it was this, but then I asked so-and-so and I heard that. You're going to show the behaviors that you want the employees to model. So common cognitive biases in ideation. I'm sure many of you know anchoring bias and confirmation bias and expert bias. But the last three are the ones I want to add a little bit more color to. Projection bias, I've managed so many teams where people think they're the customer, so they think the customer is going to react exactly the way they would. And because they have certain elements of the customer persona in there, right, they project their idea onto that person. And as part of that egocentrism, they imagine that person will react the way that they do. That's a really dangerous position to be in, even if you do look like the customer, because you're so close to understanding the problem in a way the customer might not, that the solution might not seem apparent or on point when actually put out into the wild for those customers. So really understanding that you can't take yourself and put yourself in the customer's shoes as the customer, but you have to empathize with the customer and take their perspective. Then all of a sudden now you're seeing that perspective shift I talked about, which helps you let go of your single point of view. And then authority bias, this one really becomes important, not just in the fact that we look for experts to tell us what to do, but because we give authority to AI when it comes up with solutions. We think AI is an authority because it has so much more knowledge that it has access to, and it says things so definitively. And so if we're willing to run with that authority without questioning it, we're likely to fall into a pothole at some point along the way, because not understanding why that was the right solution is as much of the problem as just not discerning what your customers want. Why would that not work? Why would that not be a good solution? You need to question it. Why did you come up with this answer? How did you come up with this answer? And so questioning authority is one of the ways to bust that bias. So creative velocity thrives in environments where teams are trained to recognize and neutralize those kinds of cognitive biases. That's why I said if a leader performs that way, they will give an environment to their employees that tells them it's okay to make experiments that don't work. It's okay to learn as you're going when there's no data to actually validate your decision. It's okay to change your mind and shift your perspective with new insights. And so you want to model those behaviors, but you also want to make sure that your team has the right mindset. So to build creative velocity, I've got this kind of visual to help you see the 4 components that I see are critical to building that type of creative velocity in a team. We'll start with mindset. So we all know about the open mindset, and the open mindset is flexibility and curiosity and resilience and all of that. But I want to add the importance of discernment, equanimity, and self-reflection. As I mentioned before, these are critical to being able to shift our perspective and to be able to understand why a perspective shift is in order. This is really something that I think from most people's perspective, they get maybe 75% of the way there, but they really struggle with managing emotions when things fail or being frustrated because people don't see what they see in innovation and they can't get the idea out there enough to test it and to prove themselves right. And that idea that you want to look at discernment uh, as a regulator, right? Every idea isn't a good one. Let's really investigate what makes an idea good when we hear it. And if we have that mindset, then the things that we do going forward will help us build creative confidence. So, creative self efficacy is the belief in your ability to generate creative ideas effectively. Think of this as creative self confidence. I worked for 13 years in the film industry before I got my MBA and worked in the tech industry. And I was not in one of the creative roles like set design or wardrobe styling or photography, cinematography, or lighting. I was the person who just made it possible for people to show up and get their work done. And I never thought that was creative until I realized in retrospect, all the things I was able to make happen that those people needed me to make happen in order for them to be successful. For example, if a director wanted to shoot a Kleenex commercial on a decommissioned aircraft carrier and they looked at me and said, go make that happen, I had to think creatively about how to bring that to life, how to make that possible. I didn't have a handbook. I'd never done that. I was in my 20s. I didn't even know who you talked to. But the idea that I believed in my capacity to solve the problem was the starting point. The next part is creative agency. I take the responsibility from that confidence to go explore how to shape that idea, how to make it happen. What are the choices that I want to make in order to execute in my way that problem and that solution partnership? How do I make that problem go away with the solution? And what is my responsibility in doing that? And so these two things really guide our capacity to innovate in a company. If your team does not feel confident, if they don't feel like they have ownership of the expression of their ideas, they're less likely to provide them. I have this is the first of it's the same QR codes. Don't worry, if you get it now, you'll get access to the Google Drive and you won't have to do it again. But in this Google Drive is a creative self-assessment. It's 11 questions and it measures your creative personal identity and your creative self-confidence. And it does it automatically. And if you do it in the first tab, it'll calculate your score. And then you move to the second tab and it'll tell you what your score is. This is really important for teams to reflect on, because if the teams don't feel capable of executing a creative idea they didn't invent, or if they don't even feel comfortable ideating an idea or conceptualizing someone else's idea, the team is going to flail, right? They're going to struggle with solving problems and they'll probably move into a symptom-based focus as opposed to a holistic focus on the problem. So getting an assessment is really helpful for you to see what the state of mind is of the employees. Now, let me also say it's a state of mind. If I had a car crash, God forbid, and was injured and was out of work for a while, I'm not going to tell you I'm going to think creatively during that period. But once everything looks lighter and brighter and the summer weather is here and I'm out actively enjoying it, I'm probably much more comfortable with my creative confidence. And so it's a state, and you can do this multiple times and find different answers at different times because it's how you look at yourself in that moment. You want to look at, again, knowing how to activate a flow state to trigger that creative mindset. There's a number of things that work. There isn't one playbook. Everybody's different. You want to find those things that make you happy. When I interviewed people for the book, it was everything from doing a long run to actually saying, I only do tasks in the morning that are very operational, and I make the time in the afternoon to avoid that. I specifically assign myself hours in the afternoon where I'm not task focused or email focused and things. So people know what it is that's their trigger. There isn't one trigger that fits everybody, but it is important for you to find yours in order to reset. And if you teach people on your team how to do this, then when they're feeling stress, they can say, all right, I'm going to take a walk around campus, get some fresh air, and reset, right? They'll own that responsibility to reset themselves. Also in the Google Drive, you'll see a link to a GPT that I created to help people regulate emotions. What I found a lot of the time is people don't recognize the emotions that are associated to the things they control or the things they don't control or the things that are happening to them uniquely versus the things that are happening to everyone. And so you react differently under those circumstances, but you don't always know what to do to get out of that mode. And this GPT is there to help you sort of catalog what you're feeling and then give you some possible ways to manage towards equanimity, to move from the level of stress or emotion that is being felt into an action-oriented place versus a reactive position. I'm going to pause a second. Anything? Everybody okay? We good? Okay, cool. Hopefully this is making some sense, and we'll have some time at the end for some questions. But again, cognitive flexibility, it gives you empathy. It provides the opportunity for other ideas to enter your thinking processes. It also means you're willing to break your habits. One of the best ways to sort of reset is to look at your daily habits and restack them, put something in that isn't there today and drop something that is, just to break the routine. One of the things that I find as someone who's worked in innovation is that habits and patterns actually sort of distress me. The idea of constant change keeps me sharp. And so I'm willing to, move to another city for a job. I'm willing to try something I haven't tried before. And that's what keeps me fresh, even if the thing I've done isn't something I like going forward. Read a new book, go to a movie I would never see. The idea that I'm breaking a pattern in itself is the goal. So we talked about leadership in Noel, so I won't dwell too much on here because I think he did a great job. But what I do want to say is the hallmarks of creative leadership is that you build a culture where AI fuels creativity and not just efficiency. And I noticed in all the talks that I've done, this is not something people think about. People think about it as a process automator, as a task automator, as something that's really about efficiency and reducing manpower. But what really it can be is a thought partner, a creative collaborator. And if you show that that's possible as a leader, you can actually encourage people to explore their creativity with AI and then build their confidence. A creative leader leads by framing, not dictating. I want to tell you where I want to be, not how I want to get there. This is what good looks like to me when I'm there. This is how I'll measure whether or not we're successful is okay. But saying I only measure success if X, Y, and Z steps are executed. Right. So giving people the idea to solve a problem within a frame is wonderful because the frame helps them focus. But dictating actually takes that focus and turns it into action and reaction and not into creative thinking. Leaders that are truly creative understand it's inherently interdisciplinary. And I think Ileana might have said this earlier, even in our breakout, the idea that you should believe a creative idea can come from anywhere. And when I worked at Real Networks, we were the first company that did a digital media subscription long before Hulu and Netflix and all of those that are out there. And the thing that was most amazing to me was how creatively our legal team contributed to that, because we had to make all new frameworks for how we would license content. We had to make all new customer agreements for what customers had the privilege and rights to. Things that didn't exist before became basically so valuable that we were able to create a patent of the whole system that was actually bought by Intel and lasted for 20 years until it just expired, because it was an interdisciplinary solution that was required in order to execute this new customer experience. Talked about diverse perspectives. We also need to just reiterate the fact that leaders need to be challenged. Just like I say, challenge AI and understand why and understand how. You have to be willing to be challenged to be understood, but also to be open to someone having a different perspective on your rationale. And so being able to invite that is really a hallmark of creative leadership. A creative leader encourages creative thinking from any role at any level at any time. And this is where what I kind of joke about the post-it note thing. You can't just have it in the room with the post-it notes. All these things can't just happen there. They have to happen in meetings all the time. They have to happen in email. They have to happen everywhere. And you have to be open to the idea. But with discernment comes more value. And so the more you teach people that component of creative thinking, that important creative mindset attribute of discernment, the more functional these ideas become, the more useful they become. And so then it's fine that they come from everywhere because they're coming from a perspective, how I can innovate in my role or how I see the world from this vantage point. And so that really is a way to open up an innovative culture. I talked about frameworks. I'm going to just touch on this briefly. The book goes into this in a lot more detail. But frameworks are really helpful, especially when you're insecure and lacking confidence, because they guide you away from your biases. They act like creative scaffolding, and you can use them with or without generative AI. And as you're learning them, it's always great to start with generative AI because it knows all of these practices. You can say to generative AI, I have this situation, this product, and I'm trying to make it more sustainable. What would be the way to do that? Well, there are a number of techniques that could be used. Generic parts would be for you to break it down into the sum of all of its most generic parts and see which ones of those could be replaceable with other materials or other things could be put to use for that same function. Scamper is a methodology that's an acronym for substitute, combine, minify, maxify. These are all actions and moves that you can take to challenge your current thinking and your current idea. Contradictory thinking is opposite thinking and inversion thinking, thinking backwards from the worst that can happen, or imagining all of your assumptions are exactly the opposite of what you think they are. What would the world look like? What would be different? What do you need to do to prevent failure by understanding what failure would bring and how you would work backwards from that case to prevent it? These are things that really are tools that any employee can use. And so to that original question that Ileana said, these are training tools. These are ways that help people think in a structured manner about a problem because they don't assume the knowledge. They ask the questions. The techniques teach someone the methodology to get away from the bias that might drive their selection of an answer. You know, our minds are really capable of remarkable things, but we have to sort of think in different ways in order to really fuel and fertilize our minds to come up with these ideas. These are 5 examples. Again, I go into detail in the book. The MacGyver mindset is really meant to work within constraints because MacGyver never had what he wanted when he had to solve a problem. He had to go figure out how to get out of whatever bind he was in with whatever he had available. And that's an incredibly helpful skill for innovation. We always look at what happens when you combine 2 things. What if you put X and Y together? What would happen? What would be the best? What would Z be? Would it be just an additive X and Y? Or would it actually take the best of X and Y and make even a better Z? These kind of lateral thinking techniques around analogies and associative thinking can actually be practiced with puzzles. Puzzles are great for helping you look laterally at problems. And I love the New York Times connections puzzle because you have to create groups of 4 words that you don't know what connects them. And sometimes they're just homophones of other words, or sometimes they have a word embedded in them. And it forces you to think differently about the word and the definition of the word, because in this context, it's everything about the word, how it's spelled, what it does. And today's connection puzzle was words missing a letter that mean other words. And again, to think like that requires practice. And so these techniques are really helpful to practice that type of thinking. Lastly, it's time. I think we've all talked about this. How do we make enough time for the team to think through things? Well, it's a continuous practice. You can't just make a brainstorm session happen and then say, I've taught people that they can be creative. You need to make sure there is an ongoing and continuous amount of effort and time spent to help develop the capacity of the team and to entertain and explore ideas that might not be fully baked, but might actually be the starter of a very innovative concept if given the time, and we are unlikely to dismiss it because we have the time. And if we're also actively soliciting that kind of insight from everyone, then it becomes more natural for them to feel welcomed into a conversation about transformation and innovation. And so the time is an ongoing thing, not like I've created time for 2 hours every quarter, but this is something that we make a part of our general meeting discussion, where we leave time in an agenda for certain elements of this to percolate. This is a thing where we actually create in our one-on-ones opportunities that are not just task-based reviews, but really encouraging employees to tell us what they see about a problem and how they might approach a solution. So this is really, again, a cycle. If you take any of these elements out, you will be less likely to be creating a culture of innovation across the organization. And the more that you look at the organization as being a font of innovative ideas at all times, the more likely you'll build creative velocity. So again, there's the QR code. You'll see the files that I referenced in the Google Drive. My website is there. You can also connect with me on LinkedIn. If I don't get to your questions today, I'm happy to follow up in a direct message, so feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. So I know we only have a few minutes, but maybe there are a couple of questions that I can field. Anyone?
Great. If you have a question, feel free to raise your hand or also post it
I'll
in
also
the chat.
take a comment. You don't have to ask a question. If you have a comment, if something I said didn't land well or isn't clear, please definitely make those comments. I want this presentation to evolve, and I'm completely open to the idea that I might have missed a point. So I'd love any feedback, actually, not just questions.
I will say, Leslie, this has been phenomenal and very rich, in my opinion. Got your book on
Excellent.
order already, and I think
Oh,
I wrote down
excellent.
3 different ideas that I want to bring back to my my iMentor group. We do a session called Think Differently, where we have 45-minute just like brush ups. So some things that I pulled out of this were thinking about like mindfulness, and developing self-awareness. So how can we work on that? And then those cognitive biases that you brought up, I thought were really interesting to think about, like how can we be more aware of those cognitive biases and start to break them down and break them apart, and be more aware of them. So
yeah, they're helpful, right? They're mental shortcuts. And over the course of a day, we make 1,000 different decisions that we don't even think about, right?
Yeah.
And that unconsciousness is actually helpful. But if we rely on our unconscious spirit to do that, we will be more likely to carry that bias into the decision-making process that assumes we're the authority, that assumes, as you know, I've thought about this, I know it so well that I don't even have to put a lot of brain power against it, and therefore I'm going to skip over the first 2 steps. And so I think that element of it is really, really important, because the mental shortcut, while it's helpful for what do I want to wear today, or what should I have for dinner, or any of the things I make a million decisions about during the day, it isn't helpful when I'm trying to solve a problem. It's the exact opposite of helpful. It's really detrimental, because it limits where we think the solution might exist.
Yep. And we talk a lot about orthodoxies, like looking at orthodoxies within your work environment or within the problem itself. But I think that that's one area that we can definitely bulk up on. So
I love that word, by the way. I love that word, orthodoxies. I think it's really reflective of things we can't touch and the status quo that can't change, right? I love that. That's a great word. Anything else? Anyone else?
Anyone who missed it, Lauren also had a great icebreaker in the chat to ask people how they were creative as a kid. I thought that's super nice.
That is such a great question. And actually, Lauren, when you look at the book, the first chapter explains, and I'll do this really fast. My childhood, I was very fortunate. My parents were professionals. My father was a doctor. My mother was a professor at a university, but they were both really talented in art. My father could play piano without reading music, and my mother was a painter, and she did exhibits. And I wanted so desperately to be creative. I thought that I was only going to be a whole person if I could figure out what my medium was, what I had to do to be creative. And they were so generous. They gave me piano lessons and acting lessons, and you name it, I went to it. And teachers would tell them, "You're throwing good money after bad. She has no talent. This isn't working." My father would actually tell me not to practice the piano at night because his doctor's office was next to the house and it was bothering the patients. Like, I lost all of my capacity to believe I could be a creative person as a child because I couldn't find a medium. My medium was sports. I was good at sports, but nothing artistic. And it was so disappointing to me that I really felt like if I drew in class as a kid or I saw what other people did, I couldn't compare. And so, from my perspective, my childhood was actually the anti-creative zone for me because I looked in the wrong places. I looked for it as if it was a medium or a talent that I had, and that I could only find that as a way to express my creative self. And so that lesson was a lesson that I really felt was why I needed to write the book, because I think there's a lot of people who just discount their creative abilities like I did.
That's so
So I
true.
love the question. It's a great one for me I hope it's okay if I crib it for another session sometime.
Please do.
I was thinking the same.
Great. Well, I hope this was helpful. I really do hope it was worth your time. I know it's been a long morning, and Noel kicked it off really well. So I hope I sort of met the bar that he set, and that this gave you some food for thought. And again, feel free to reach out afterwards if something occurs to you on LinkedIn with a question or to connect. I'd love to meet you, especially because you're all in innovative jobs, and I'd love to get feedback on anything that I said or questions about things that you've tried. So definitely stay in touch. And I really am super grateful for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Leslie. Ilariana, I also saw that you unmuted yourself. Did you also have?
I unmuted, and I just wanted to share, like, first of all, Melody, thank you for organizing these sessions. It's like, I have no words to express how much I learn from everybody every time I make it to these sessions. And thank you, Leslie, for joining us. What you're really talking about, and what you make me smile, another music to my ears, is that you're having another language of educating all of us that everybody has the hidden innovator in themselves. And that's what I like, literally what I wrote about today. But then also, like, about a year ago, I did my own hidden innovator research. And it's amazing to see, like, how many people are sometimes they just find themselves in that position of trying to activate the innovators within the organization and inspire them and set the system, set the process. And they learn by doing, and like, they're navigators. And if they do not demonstrate some of the traits that you just so well captured in the book, then they don't succeed in what they're trying to accomplish. And there are people who already practice it, but they don't necessarily always have the language to put the name to that, their own internal creativity, to their own ability to make that process happen, bring ideas together, shape the templates for the ideas, shape the stages for the ideas to move along in the journey. So it's just super inspirational. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you for saying that. One last thing I want to just encourage people to do too is try these frameworks with AI after you've tried a problem yourself. Do it yourself. Think about the problem yourself. And then AI using one of these techniques, not just in prompt engineering the problem into a question that gets an answer, but really explore the idea with AI and see how much more expansive it may be. See what other ideas might come back that you didn't expect based on your experience. And in that process, understand what those ideas are and dismiss the ones that are irrelevant. But I think it helps build your confidence that you understand the process to ideate that way, right? You do it yourself and you feel limited. You do it with AI and it has no emotion. It's not attached to anything. It doesn't even know what a good idea is. And sometimes it makes mistakes and it doesn't stop ideating even if it makes mistakes, right? Like, it's a good practical example of how to be, right? How to imagine. And so it's a nice comparison to do it on your own and then to do that same exercise with AI. Well, this was great. I really appreciate everyone's time, and I'm really happy to hear it seemed valuable to folks. So that's terrific.
Thanks so much, Leslie. Yeah, it's been really inspiring, and I found myself shaking my head yes the whole time. And I'm definitely going to check out the GPT to regulate emotions after. It looks super interesting.
Terrific. And anytime you want to talk about the creative self-assessment or any of the materials in the Google Drive, just let me know. I appreciate everyone's time. Thank you so much.